This Choircast podcast is brought to you by Heretic Happy Hour, whose tagline is burning questions, not people. You know, we've been around for a long time now, and we've had many different lineups, and Heretic Happy Hour is only getting bigger and better, with guest hosts like Rainn Wilson, David Bentley Hart, John Fugelsang, Candida Moss, Elaine Pagels, and of course, December Rose. 2024 and 2025 are turning out to be our best years yet. So check us out on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's Heretic Happy Hour. We hope to see you soon.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney and Bethany Shea.
Well, hi, friends. Welcome back to the podcast called This Is Not Church. If it was church, you would have left by now. At least that's what Nat says. And I just don't believe it. I believe that you'd continue forth with me. So I'm really glad that you're here with us. I'm here with John. You want to say hi, John?
Hi, John.
And we have a wonderful guest, as always. We always get to talk to the coolest people ever. And today we have Rose Marie Berger on with us. She is a Catholic poet and writer who has worked for social change movements for 40 years. She has a master's degree in poetry. She's a poetry editor, and she is senior associate editor at Sojourners magazine, which has a mission to inspire hope and action by articulating the biblical call to social justice. A lot of our listeners have probably spent a lot of time reading some of those articles. She has published numerous articles and collaborated on several books. She was raised in the American River watershed in traditional Miwok territory. She has lived for more than 30 years in Washington, D.C., in the Anacostia watershed in traditional Anacostoan-Piscataway territory. I think I might be saying that wrong. And she is currently active in the Watershed Discipleship movement and the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, which actually formed in 2016 following a landmark meeting in Rome on Catholics and Nonviolence. So you have quite the biography, or you've really quite done a lot in your life, and we're just so glad that you're here with us today. So welcome to the show, Rose. Glad that you're here.
Thanks so much to both of you. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm so glad. Sojourners has really influenced and impacted myself, and I know for John and other of our listeners, we've really been impacted by the different authors and writers that have contributed to that magazine over the years, based upon a lot of your own expertise. And we'll get into that. But one of the questions we always like to start off with is just to get to know a little bit more about you and your faith background, your faith journey. What kind of brings you to the current moment that you're in today?
Yeah, thank you. It's Catholics don't get to witness very often, so let me give a testimony. Yes, I grew up in kind of radical Catholic household. So we were connected with the Catholic worker movement. I was being raised in a sort of progressive Catholic household, just as Vatican II was beginning to unfold in the Catholic Church. And so it was a time of really a lot of experimentation and a returning to what are the roots of the gospel that, that carry themselves and into what we understand ourselves to be as Catholics. And so it was really a vibrant, progressive, creative church that I grew up in, with a very strong commitment to social justice. And that was certainly present in both of my parents and families, and then present in the Catholic schools that I attended up through high school. And so that sort of, I don't know, it's kind of, I like to say that, Catholicism is kind of in my DNA. I'm a Catholic through and through. It's a way of looking at the world. So I don't consider myself a former Catholic or a fallen Catholic or any of those kinds of things. I'm just a Catholic. I know others may offer different critiques on things. That's fine. But for myself, that Catholicism, it's been in my family for a very long time. So it's not just a part of my personal faith and the way I walk in the world today, but it's been something that kept my immigrant Irish ancestors, my immigrant French ancestors, it kept them strong as they went through a lot of changes, social and political, and familial changes. So it's something very important to me and worth for me to continue to invest in that identity and learn from it, and try to be a good witness to it in the way I walk and move in the world.
Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, thank you for that. John, did you want to have a question?
No, I was just going to say thank you for giving us all that background. It was amazing information to have.
Yeah. And it sounds like your Catholic roots it's like it's part of your DNA almost. It's like you don't even know where you end and your Catholicism begins. And it seems to have really influenced the way that you see the world and how you engage in social justice movements. And I'm wondering if it impacted the way that you are a part of this work of like watershed movements, and what does that even mean? If you could tell us a little bit about that.
That's a great question. The watershed discipleship movements came out of an ecumenical Christian way of beginning to be much more attentive to God working through the earth and creation around us. And so there's a strong tradition, especially more recently in the Catholic Church, of being attentive to creation, being environmental stewards, and that's certainly picked up in Protestant churches and other communities, other Christian communities, as well as other faith communities. The watershed discipleship movement really says, okay, what if we identified our communities by watersheds rather than by congregations or denominations or whatever? So how, in the old Catholic way of thinking, you had a congregation, and a congregation was responsible for a certain set of square blocks in a city. So it didn't matter if you were Catholics or not Catholics. It was like the church was responsible for everybody within those, however many square blocks. So in some ways, we transferred that over to the watershed idea. If you identify your smallest ecological niche where you live or where you spend your most amount of time, what would the watershed be? And then who lives in it? Creatures, animals, neighbors, and what does that teach you about how to center yourself and root yourself as a person of faith in the environment and in a collaborative neighborhood? So that when you're asking, who are our neighbors and what are their needs, you're not just asking about the people, because you recognize that the people, the animals, the water, the air, all those things are connected, and their health is connected. So that's kind of the basic framework of the watershed discipleship movement, is just helping people to recognize that they do live in watersheds and that there is a spiritual and a Christian perspective that can help bring new insight into where we live and who our neighbors are.
That's how it is. It's like, what does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself? And can we expand the notion of our neighbors beyond human beings into even the plants and the creatures that live within our proximal spaces? How do you see that in your own life? Like, how do you do that? Right now you're in Ventura or that area. How do you visualize the watershed there and care for the neighbors in your midst?
Yeah, we live in the Ojai Valley, in a little town called Oakview, which is a unincorporated area, mostly agricultural area. And so the larger watershed that we're in is the Ventura River watershed. The sort of narrower one for our neighborhood is the San Antonio Creek watershed. And, part of for us at home, what that's looked like is just figuring out where the San Antonio Creek watershed travels. What are the headwaters? Where is it going? What's the health of the water at its headwaters versus where it flows into the next larger body? And then who are the neighbors along that path? What are their needs? What are the creatures? Like we occasionally have mountain lions. How many mountain lions are getting hit? What's the issue with traffic, both causing injuries to animals and people? Do we need a stoplight at a particular place where there seems to be a lot of animal and people crossing? Very simple, small things like that. But and in addition, we're attending a church in Ojai, and they have a creek that runs through their property, but hadn't really been able to give a lot of attention to where that creek started and where it ended and whether the water was healthy or not. And so part of the whole, there's a lot of clean water movements, but part of the whole watershed movement is we want water that we are asked to care for. We want it to be drinkable, swimmable, baptizable. So, can kids get in it and play? Can people drink it without getting super sick? And if a church wanted to have its baptisms down by the riverside, is that possible? And what would it take to help make that possible?
Oh, I love those questions. We have a little creek in our church property area as well. And I'm curious if there was something that we could do, would you recommend, is it important to get environmental status happening? What's the environmental impact of people that are untrained to remove non-native plants or to help get rid of debris? Is there usually some sort of a pathway to make sure that we're doing this above board? Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think, different places have different sets of resources. And so sometimes there's somebody in the area who's a pretty good naturalist who can consult with a church or a small community to say, this would be a really helpful approach to help bringing this little creek back to life. They would look at where the erosion is. They would look at what non-native plants are, filling up the creek bed. Sometimes if you're in a small town, somebody's already done the environmental impact report on where the streams are and which ones are cleanest and which ones are draining well. And so sometimes it's just a matter of looking it up. That was what we did in Ojai. We looked up the environmental reports and we realized that our little stretch of the creek was really dirty. And that didn't seem good for the church. So it seemed like we could be better neighbors than that.
Yeah.
So we started saying, okay, well, do we have a little bit of money to invest in having somebody come and look at the part that's on our property and really help us think of a new strategy to keep the water in the ground, make sure it's not overflowing onto the parking lot, make sure it's not getting a lot of wash off debris into it. And so for not very much money, we had somebody come and just kind of help us map out a plan. And all of that then is rolled into some scripture study on caring for water and what are all the water references in the Bible. Thinking about if Jesus was indigenous to our place and this watershed, if he was getting baptized in the San Antonio Creek, what would that look like? What would the bird that comes down from heaven, what would that bird be?
Mm-hmm.
What?
Oh, I love that.
Just really trying to open the imagination that our faith and our scripture, while written many millennia ago, and oftentimes involving people that it's very hard for us to relate to sometimes, that there are some things that we can relate to very closely, and to allow people to enter into that and have a little fun with it, just enjoy it and understand that they are living in a sacred and holy place. The Holy Land is not always elsewhere.
Yeah. So that's good. I really, that helps a lot with some ideas. Kind of switching gears then to this work that you're doing with Sojourners, because there's a section of that on environment and all that as well. I was going to ask a question off recording, but I'll ask it now. And that's how long have you been working with Sojourners?
I came to Sojourners as a year-long volunteer in 1986 and have worked in various capacities. I worked in our national organizing team for some period of years. I was a member of Sojourners' intentional community and served as a pastor for that community at various points. And then eventually ran our internship program, our volunteer program, for about 10 years, and then moved over to the magazine staff, where I've been for the last very long period of time.
Yeah.
So you've been doing this work for a long time. Have you ever compiled a book before, like within the Sojourners repertoire?
I did a lot of ghostwriting for books that we've done that were either published under somebody's name or were published as teaching materials, but I hadn't ever really put together an anthology like this.
Okay.
We've done them in the past, but it was a pretty long time ago. So it was really exciting to look at not only the material written, since the 1970s, but particularly for me, since I work mostly on the magazine, to spend time looking at a lot of our online pieces that I don't often see day to day, and really begin to see the depth and creativity and interesting conversation happening both in print and online over a course of time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and you, this book, and I didn't mention it in the bio, but this book that you've helped put together called Light for the Way, Seeking Simplicity, Connection, and Repair in a Broken World is very timely, because I think our world just feels excessively broken right now. But you have like different essays from different writers, like Caitlin Curtis, who is a Native American person who writes beautifully. You have Walter Brueggemann in there, Richard Rohr, Margaret Atwood, like just these really incredibly engaging, brilliant thinkers, soulful people that are leading. I mean, each essay kind of leads us down this path towards, from like contemplation to community and connection. How did you put it together? Like, how did you decide? I'm sure it wasn't just on you personally, but how did you and your team decide how to put the book together, and why even put the book together in the first place?
Yeah, it's a good question, because we really wrestled with, of all the things that we needed to invest our time and resources in, was putting together an anthology of past material was that the best use of time? And we eventually realized that we really value the work that we've put out over the many years, and we thought this might be just a new way for people to engage with the mission of Sojourners. And we have such incredible writers who support us and who work, to provide really good material for us, that it just seemed like in the end, there are core issues that so many people are wrestling with today, whether they're spiritual, not religious, whether they're coming from more conservative backgrounds and now asking questions, or whether they're coming from very progressive political backgrounds, and now are wondering if they shouldn't have tossed out their faith completely. So I think there's a bit of a meeting place where people are asking really, really good questions. And so it seemed like, as we curated many of the essays that we've published, that putting them together in a way that just both helps people move through a journey, move through a set of questions, but is also a book that you can just open up anywhere and just start reading an essay and think, oh, okay, that leaves me with some good questions. I like that. And so especially because people are hurting and are afraid and feel overwhelmed, this seemed like something that we could offer to help encourage one another.
I really enjoyed the different sections of the book and how the essays they kind of flow. And I don't know if that was hard to do, to get them to kind of flow like that. There must have been a lot of work to put into that. Was it? We've had other people on before who have compiled books like this, and one of the things they found is that, yes, it was hard work, but sometimes the flow kind of just came and started to work for you. Did you find that to be true?
Yes, we did. We did a couple different things as we narrowed down the essays that we wanted to include. We had some very informal focus groups where we were just asking subscribers and staff and other friends of Sojourners, what articles stand out to you over the years? Like, what's an article that you think, oh, I always want to go back and read that. And then we did just some online research of our own data and said, what have been the most popular articles, for whatever reason. And began to sort some of those things out. And then we looked at who are some of our more high profile writers? And do they have something that kind of fits in with this theme? And then we just started sorting. and we went from like 300 articles down to getting closer to 70 articles, and then trying to put them into different buckets and look for that, as you said, that flow that starts to happen. And it did eventually begin to click into place. And once that happened, then it became clear which order to put the essays in within a chapter, and then which order to put the chapters in within a whole book.
I appreciate how one of the beginning essays had to do with the difference between loneliness and being alone with God. There's a loneliness epidemic in our United States or in the world, really, probably to many degrees. But it was just a few years ago, the Surgeon General put out that warning that said, this is a big problem. Like isolation, loneliness is a big problem. Can you explain the difference that you have seen or experienced between loneliness and like silent solitude kind of thing with God?
Well, maybe I'll respond to that just by reading a couple lines from the introduction to that chapter.
Yeah.
Because it addresses what you are saying. To be alone with God is a very different thing from the loneliness of not being known or seen or recognized. And growing our souls depends on practicing spiritual openness to the mystery that created us. So I think that's one of the questions that we just continue to ask ourselves. And I've been at Sojourners now for long enough to see the question return. What are the new ways that we are growing our souls? And there is a difference between the aloneness with one's creator that is both deeply fulfilling and ultimately terrifying and awe-inspiring, versus the loneliness of, as it says here, not being seen, not knowing your neighbors, not smiling at somebody, having somebody smile at you when you're getting in the car to go to work or to go to the grocery store, feeling like you're just living in an isolated house with people around you, but none of them know who you really are. And I think that second, that deep sense of loneliness and disconnection is what so many people are experiencing. And the question is, can we cultivate enough of our own inner life and our own aloneness with God? We, being Christians or people who take a spiritual path very seriously, can we cultivate that inner life enough that we are able to address our own needs a bit and then have something left to recognize our neighbors and to help not end, but at least diminish the loneliness that others experience? And the reality is, it's kind of cliche, but the smallest thing can really change a person's experience. And it's whether you just say hi to somebody in the grocery line, or whether you help the mom who's got a screaming kid or she's trying to get the groceries together, just very small things that just acknowledge that I see you, I see your humanity, I see what you're doing, and in a gentle way, I'm just extending you a sense of love, one human being to the other. And I think that really does change things on the simplest of levels.
What do you think is causing such loneliness in people? Like, what do you think is the block for the people that you've experienced so far?
I don't really know. I'm sure the Surgeon General has much more data on it than I do. But my perception is what used to be things that were just accepted parts of everyone's life, whether that was going to church on Sunday or going out to pizza on Friday nights with your buddies or going to a baseball game, that these kind of common habits that we did together, just culturally or as a society, that so many of those have broken down. And so you have not only the institutions have broken down, but then the shift to kind of an online life where your primary interactions are with the screen, whether that's with another person on the screen or TV or, whatever, but those are not real life interactions and they only work on one level. So you get deprived of what you need to be a full human being. And then as those continue, you get more and more disconnected. And then, families have strife. And if there's not a community there to help them go through that, then they get separated from each other. And it just continues a kind of splitting that leaves people in fractured places. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I find it rather ironic that in a time where we can connect with people so quickly and so easily through the internet and through, the phone in our hand or the computer on our desk, it seems like in this time we are more isolated than before we had all this electronic connection. And it's kind of sad in a way. I mean, I do it too. I mean, I find myself reaching out to people online, but I don't really make plans to meet up in person. And I feel like that's part of the issue, right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we all do it in some ways. The internet and the connectivity, electronic connectivity has given us so much. I mean, it's right. It's just given us incredible tools. And at the same time, it has taken up too much space in our cultivating of our communities and our social stickiness, so trying, I think as a culture, and maybe, I don't know, all over the world, maybe, but certainly in the US, I think we're still just trying to find the right balance, but we're not there yet.
Yeah. And then with AI on top of that, I mean, I can reach out to AI and ask the questions I would, maybe I would ask, even my doctor. Right. I can go online and ask AI a question about, I was having issues with some medication I'm on. I asked AI to give me is this a normal symptom of the medicine I'm on? I was like, and I didn't even have to, I did still reach out to my doctor because I still think it's better to talk to a human being about things. But AI is another step towards this disconnect that I'm seeing. I mean,
it can be. And it's like all of these tools and innovations provide us with some things that are good and some things that are nefarious and some things that are just unintended consequences of the tool. And we're still sorting through all those things.
Well, and you mentioned how important it is to, you can be feeling lonely or feeling isolated even when you're in a room full of people, because the way that we feel connected is when we're truly known. And it's hard to be truly known across a screen, or especially with an AI bot. Being truly known is so vulnerable and scary, though, because what happens when you let your guard down and you get rejected, or there's always that fear of rejection. So it seems like human connection is one of the bravest things that we can do to help others feel less alone. In the process, puts us at risk of being rejected, which is scary.
Yeah, it is. It is scary. I think it's always a little bit scary. Intimacy is always a little bit scary, and it's the place where humans grow.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's that, it's practicing habits that help us grow.
Yeah.
Is what's really important. And having the courage and the self-awareness to say, okay, if somebody snipes back at me, that's okay.
Yes.
That's all right. Okay, moving on.
Yeah.
Yeah. These are not world collapsing things. These are just human being things. Yeah,
it almost is like building muscles of just trial and error, putting yourself out there. And I think most people are just desiring to be seen and included. And sometimes they don't know how to do that, and so we have to be the brave ones that make it happen. But it is something that we have to practice. It's like a spiritual discipline, including people.
Yeah, it is. I think that's right. Yeah. Sometimes
I think the practice, in my experience, the practice of connection with God and being in prayer and really fostering that relationship has allowed me to foster relationships with actual human beings, with the physical instead of just the spiritual. And my connection that I have within the spiritual allows me to go into the physical a little bit more rapidly without as much fear. But even that has taken years of practice. And there are many times where I'm like, oh, probably not today.
I think that's right. And I think to a certain extent, that's why I put the onus of that practice on people of faith. That we have a practice, we have a tradition, we have a belief that God created us for a purpose and that God loves us and that we don't have to be as afraid. We may still be afraid, but we don't have to be. And hopefully we have communities of support. And so that's why I kind of want to encourage and push us a little bit more to say, we are the people to do this. We are the ones who have a faith tradition and have have access to a certain wisdom that hopefully makes us a little bit more resilient as people. And so we can take the opportunity to draw on our tradition and offer it, or at least offer what it gives us to a larger group, I don't necessarily mean evangelizing. I just mean being whole and healthy people and helping others be whole and healthy people,
Right. Yeah. Evangelizing has never been that successful in making whole healthy people. It's successful in numbers, I guess, but when it comes to actual holistic health of a human being, I don't know if evangelism has been that successful.
Well, there's the quote attributed to St. Francis of Assisi about, preach the gospel at all times, use words when necessary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Is there a part of the book that really resonated with you? Like a reading or, one of the writings that you were like, oh, I'm taking this with me?
Oh, that's a really good question. Of course, we don't have any favorites. We're not playing favorites.
Of course not.
With any of our authors, that would be wrong. But I do find myself, going back to Laurel Matthewson's essay that was actually an excerpt from a book that she published. It is titled, "My Spiritual Director Told Me I Needed a Silent Retreat." And I just have enjoyed. I like her writing. I like her sense of humor, and this essay is about Laurel's conversations, quote unquote, with the 16th century Spanish Saint Teresa of Avila, and so how Laurel's a pastor in Southern California, and how in the world does she come into these conversations with Saint Teresa of Avila? I just don't know. So the whole essay of Laurel sort of talking back and forth with Saint Teresa about modern life versus life in the 16th century and how one gets closer to God. I just find it very engaging.
Gosh, that's so cool.
She says, Teresa was a grounded mystic. She's down to earth in her prose, her witty and candid teaching, and her lived experience. It could be argued that every true mystic or saint is grounded or has some element of both active and a contemplative life. Teresa strikes me as remarkably and robustly balanced in the way that her basic reputation as a mystic sometimes betrays. She is notably resolute in both her defense of the reality of the supernatural prayer experiences that she has and her insistence that this loving movement of God to an individual must then extend into the world rather than curve back on itself. What we might call her grounded nature even extended into her prayer dialogues with Jesus. Once, when complaining honestly to Christ about her many struggles, Teresa heard a response to this effect: Don't be so troubled. So do I treat my friends. And Teresa's tart response, I know, Lord, but that's why you have so few friends.
Oh, the honesty.
So, just lovely essays like that that are humorous and yet have such depth and wisdom to them.
That's one thing I like about the book. I mean, there's always I think everyone's going to find an author that they know.
Yeah.
And that they recognize the name. Like for me, it was Richard Rohr. When as soon as I saw Richard Rohr's name, I'm not going to lie, I went right to his essay and I read his essay first, which was he's an amazing writer. I love what he writes, and his essay on silence was great. I have to admit, I didn't know who Margaret Atwood was because I'm not a Handmaid's Tale fan. So I did read that one as well once I figured out who it was. But I guess there's not really a question in that other than, is there, I mean, and you've talked about this too, there's not really a right or wrong way to read the book. You can read it, just sit down and read it in order, or you can go and pick and choose, right? And you can use it as almost like a devotional even.
Right. I think that's right, or at least that's what we hoped, is that each essay stands on its own, that the themes in the book would appeal to people at various stages of life or just various stages of a day sometimes. And so that you could just open it more as a devotional and just read something and find something that feeds your soul a little bit. And you could also read it from the beginning to end and see a kind of arc that in some ways reflects an arc that most people on a spiritual path go through, sometimes every day, sometimes certainly across a lifetime. And that, just engage all the different voices engaging on topics that are deep and speak to our humanity, but are also sometimes funny, sometimes very sad, will really help engage that humanness in us and let it come out more.
Did you find there was a section that was harder to compile than others? Or
no, that's a good question. I don't think so. The question on the spiritual thriving and paradox might have been one of the harder sections, but only in the sense that we had several of the essays in that section and I didn't know where to put them. And then as I started reading them, I'm like, oh, it's because they're all dealing with paradoxical situations. And it's just the situations are all slightly different. But that allowed us a kind of framing for those pieces. Yeah. And we also, we enjoyed putting in things like Walter Brueggemann's piece. Sojourners was incredibly honored to have Dr. Bergerman write for us over many, many, many years. So we have all kinds of incredible Bible studies by Walter Brueggemann. But the one that we included was, what would Jesus buy on Reverend Billy's Church of Stop Shopping?
Yeah, that's a great one.
That was asking him to write an article reviewing kind of street theater and an anti-consumerist lens. And he just jumped at the opportunity to write that piece. And so we were delighted to be able to include that, something a little bit different from Walter's oeuvre of deep Bible commentary.
Yeah. No, I really enjoyed that one. This idea of almost like a modern day prophet.
Yeah.
As he's this I don't even want to call it a church, but like the church of not buying things.
Stop shopping. Yeah.
Right. The church of not shopping. But that was I really enjoyed that one. That was a good one. I'm
just going to switch topics here for a moment because I am in a poetry group and we write poetry together. We recite it together. I'm in two groups actually. And I've only just gotten into poetry in the last year. And one of the people in this group is a high school English teacher. And she would like me to help put together like a workshop for freshmen on poetry. And I'm supposed to recite something and then tell them how to do it. And I have no idea what I'm doing at all. I'm just like, I just write and it comes out and that's it. How did you get into poetry? Do you still foster poetry in yourself? Like, what does poetry look like in your life?
Yeah, I think I started writing poetry when I was 5,
Wow.
It just all kind of came out in that form, and continued to study poetry in college and try to publish a few things. And then went back when I was in my 40s maybe and got a master's in poetry, and just really loved the discipline of reading poetry, analyzing it in the sense of learning the context of it, the social context, the meaning of things, and then what tools did a poet choose to help convey their meaning. And when I was getting my master's, we could get paired with a particular mentor for the program, and so you interviewed all these different professors and tried to find one that matched with you. And so I said to one, well, I went through several professors with this question until I found the one that I wanted to pair with. But I said, I want to start with whale song and move all the way down to contemporary poetry and explore how sound and music and word have evolved over time. Can you help me do that? and most said no. one said yes. And so I was able to study with Dennis Nerksey, who for many years was the poet laureate of New York, and just really had such a wonderful time thinking about starting with humpback whale songs that are very structured. I don't know if you would call them poems, but rhythmic expressions of sound, some of which go on for hundreds of years before they repeat again. And so just like thinking about poetry from, about what does a humpback whale song teach humans about our poetic adorations, and then all the way down to, just working with kids at the Sojourners Neighborhood Center and showing them a picture out of the newspaper and saying, okay, let's write a poem about this, and having them just say, just pick out a word that jumped out at them. Or when they look at this picture, what does the picture feel like? What color do they think the picture would be if it was going to be a color? How did this scene smell? And just doing all of those kind of sensory explorations, and then finding, especially for people who are new to poetry, just finding a good form for it to fit in. Whether it's a haiku form or a sonnet or whatever, and just saying, just have fun with it. Just see if you can work within this form and what happens when you do. And I think that just, it tightens the ligaments of language and expression in a way that it just makes you feel good. It makes you feel like you can really express something that you might not have been able to express in another way.
Yeah, for me, writing poetry is somewhat of a release of just what's going on in my head. I'd be asked by someone, well, how do you even start writing poetry? And for me, it's just finding that first line. Once I have, and it could take me 30 minutes, it could take me a day, it could take me a week to get that first line. And once I have that first line, something clicks, and then it starts to flow. Do you find anything similar like that?
Yes, yeah, definitely. And it just reminds me, there was a time when I was leading poetry workshops in I guess it was a state penitentiary in West Virginia. And so I had a bunch of guys who were there to take a poetry class, like a weekend long poetry class. And at first I started asking them to write just write a poem, whatever it is, whatever you're feeling. And the poems came back and they were all about their girlfriends and, and kind of all this stuff. And they were very kind of hallmarky, they were just not all that great. And then somewhere in the conversation, one of the guys had compared his girlfriend to his first car. And I'm like, okay, well, go back and write another poem and tell me about your first car. All of a sudden, the poetry that came out of these guys was incredible. The language was vibrant, and the sort of touching on all these issues around chrome and reflections and who I see in the chrome and all, it just was beautiful. And every single one of them wrote fantastic poems. And so sometimes it is just trying to figuring out what is the thing that unlocks a memory, that's really powerful in our minds and hearts. That's stored in there. And then just giving permission for that to come out.
Poetry, often, at least from my experience, it is a connection to the deeper self. And when we can share poetry, it especially if we share with others, it invites people to see our deeper self. It can be very intimidating, but I go to a monthly poetry reading and it is, my goodness, it is so interesting, like the depth of people's lives and loves and heartbreak that they write about and having us all weeping in some ways. And then the next poem is about, I'm not even going to say it. It's like so off the wall, off color. Like people are like squirming, like cannot believe that they just said that. And it's usually has to do with some sort of sexual act. And it is, it is the funniest thing to have a group of people that aren't actually connected in real life, sharing their intimate details of life together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
so
and then you go back and look at Shakespeare and look at the early Greek poetry, and it was quite graphic. So it's well within the tradition, I would say.
Well, and I appreciate you saying that story about the man who talked about his girlfriend by his car, and then you had him write again and about his car, and it was like he had to stay on the surface to get to where he needed to go underneath. And he had to start there in order to get to the lower part. And I think that's really helpful for me when I'm like thinking about leading these teenagers through something. Sometimes I can start with an easy prompt first, just to get the juices flowing, and then invite them to, what about this prompt actually do you really want to write about, and go from there. What are you working on next with Sojourners? Anything else in your future with that you're excited about?
Well, we've got every month we have an issue of the magazine that comes out. And so we are working on the forthcoming issue. And we have a lovely feature article in that issue about sort of the spirituality of families and individuals walking with dementia. And what do we do when we can't remember who we are or what our connections are, but yet we believe that God remembers deeply who we are? And just, how do we hold that? How do we incorporate that into our understanding of faith? And are there things that we can learn when we're caregiving for those with dementia that help deepen our understanding of God? And it's a lovely article. And I'm looking forward to it getting out in the world. But the great thing about working at Sojourners magazine is we get those kind of articles all the time. Really, either really fascinating political insights into things from people working on the ground in some area, or lovely spiritual essays, good theological wrestling, and also just, interesting reviews of things and interviews and just other things that pop up. And for me, it's still, even after all this time, I still get excited about the next issue of the magazine. So that's what I'm working on.
Well, this has just been such an incredible conversation with you today. And just for those who are still on, to remind you all, the book is Light for the Way, Seeking Simplicity, Connection, and Repair in a Broken World, with all sorts of incredible authors and writers who lend their expertise and their own experiences towards these beautiful pieces of writing. So we really appreciate you on with us today, Rose. John, is there anything else that you'd like to share?
No, just thank you for taking the time to have a conversation with us. It's been an amazing conversation. I've loved every minute of it. And I really encourage people to buy the book. It is really, really good. Something definitely worth putting in front of yourself and reading. So I encourage that wholeheartedly.
That's great. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And yeah, just for people who want to see more about the book, they can check it out at sojo.net/light, sojo.net/light. And also you can check us out on Instagram at Sojogram. And there's just lots of good stuff out there to help us all, help sustain us all on this journey that we're on.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.